I never expected that a coffee order would dismantle my life. To be fair, my life was a structure built of the most fragile materials: routine, order, and a carefully maintained distance from anything that might feel too much. I was a graphic designer, and I lived my life the way I designed a web page, on a grid. Everything had its place. My work files were meticulously organized, my apartment was a testament to minimalist control, and my emotions were tucked away into neatly labeled subfolders I rarely opened. The centerpiece of this rigid structure, the load-bearing column of my entire week, was my daily trip to the daily grind. And the reason for that was him. His name was Leo, and he was the antithesis of my grid existence. He was all warm tones and soft lines in a world I tried to keep black and white. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to test the structural integrity of his worn gray t-shirts. His arms were a roadmap of faint veins and a light dusting of dark hair, and his hands, which I watched with an almost religious focus, were large but moved with an impossible gentleness as they worked the chrome and steel of the espresso machine. He was a master of his craft, tamping the coffee grounds with a firm, practiced twist, steaming milk into a swirling vortex, pouring latte art that was a tiny, fleeting masterpiece. A fern, a heart, a swan. I saved photos of them on my phone like a secret art collection. He was, of course, completely unattainable. This wasn't just my usual brand of anxious pessimism. It was a logical conclusion based on observable data. He was friendly with everyone. The warm, low rumble of his voice, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very floorboards, was deployed with equal kindness to the hurried businessman, the gossiping college students, and the elderly woman who always ordered a decaf cappuccino with extra foam. His smile was a part of the uniform. He was the sun, and we were all just planets rotating in his orbit, warmed by a light that wasn't meant for any one of us in particular. I was sure he was straight. There was no evidence to the contrary, and my mind, always seeking the safest assumption, locked onto it like a life raft. He was a beautiful painting in a museum, and I was just a visitor, admiring him from behind the velvet rope of the counter. So I kept my distance, my admiration a silent, secret thing. My only form of communication, my only attempt at connection, was my coffee order. It was my secret handshake, my coded message to a world that wasn't listening. A large iced Americano, for shots, light on the ice, with a splash of oat milk and exactly 1 pump of sugar-free vanilla. It was an absurdly specific request, a monument to my own pickiness. It was a test. In 3 years of ordering it, no one had ever gotten it right on the first try. They'd forget the light ice, use 2 pumps of vanilla, or God forbid, use regular milk. It was a tiny, constant confirmation of my place in the world, a complicated order, easily misunderstood. An anomaly. I would never say anything, of course. I would just take the slightly wrong coffee, pay, and leave, the minor failure a familiar stone in my pocket. But Leo was different. From his first week, he got it. He never wrote it down. The first time I gave the order, he just paused, his dark eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second longer than was professionally necessary. A flicker of concentration, a slight furrow in his brow. Got it, he'd rumbled and turned away. When he called out the order, it was perfect. Every single time. It became our ritual. I'd step up to the counter, and before I could speak, he'd smile. A small, genuine thing that was different from his customer service smile. The usual, he'd ask. I'd just nod, my throat suddenly tight. That small acknowledgement, that simple act of being seen and remembered correctly, was the highlight of my day. It was a flicker of warmth in my cold, orderly world. I cataloged every detail about him. The way he'd push his dark, unruly hair off his forehead with the back of his wrist. The faded tattoo of what looked like a mountain range peeking out from under his sleeve. The scent that clung to him. Not cologne, but something far more fundamental. Coffee, yes, but also clean soap and a faint, woody spice, like sawdust and cinnamon. It was the scent of solid, grounded things. I built a fortress of daydreams around these small observations, a safe place where the velvet ropes didn't exist. Then came the day the grid collapsed. It started like any other Tuesday. The sky was a flat, indifferent gray. I had a deadline looming, a client who thought a pop of color meant using every shade of neon known to man. I needed my coffee. I needed that one moment of perfect, predictable ritual before diving back into the chaos. I walked into the cafe, the familiar scent of roasting beans a welcome embrace. He was there, at the counter, his back to the door as he restocked a shelf with bags of coffee. The line was short. When it was my turn, he turned around, and that small, private smile bloomed on his face. "The usual?" he asked, his voice that familiar, soothing balm. I nodded, my own small smile feeling stiff and unnatural on my face. "Please." He worked with his usual quiet efficiency, the hiss of the steam wand and the clink of the portafilter a familiar symphony. I watched his hands, the way his fingers moved with such certainty. He was an island of calm in my anxious ocean. He finished the drink, the condensation already beating on the clear plastic cup. He put a lid on it and slid it across the counter toward me. But he didn't let go. His fingers were still resting on the lid. "I've been making this for you for months," he said, his voice lower than usual, forcing me to lean in slightly to hear him over the grinder. "And I still don't know your name. Seems wrong. I'm Leo." My heart did a painful little stutter step. This was new. This was a deviation from the script. My mind raced, trying to find the right response. He wanted my name. Just my name. A simple piece of data. But it felt monumental, like handing over a secret key. "It's Julian," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Julian," he repeated, and the way he said it, the sound of it in that low, rumbling voice, sent a strange jolt through me. It sounded different. It sounded real. He smiled again, a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "I'll try to remember that for the cup next time." And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A violent, insistent vibration. I pulled it out, annoyed at the interruption of this perfect, fragile moment. It was my sister. I almost ignored it, but she never called during the workday unless it was an emergency. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. "I have to take this," I mumbled, gesturing with the phone. Leo nodded, his smile fading into a look of concern as he finally released my drink. "Go ahead." I stepped away from the counter, my perfect coffee forgotten, and answered the call. "Hey, what's up?" My sister's voice was tight, frayed at the edges. "It's Mom," she said, and the world tilted on its axis. She fell. Down the stairs. "An ambulance is on its way." The rest of her words dissolved into a meaningless roar. The carefully constructed walls of my ordered life crumbled into dust. The sounds of the cafe, the hiss of steam, the clatter of ceramic, the low hum of conversation, faded in and out, distorted and strange. My breath caught in my chest, a sharp, painful thing. My vision tunneled. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. I leaned back against the wall, the cool brick a poor anchor in the sudden, violent storm that had erupted inside me. I was vaguely aware of my sister still talking, her voice a frantic, distant buzz in my ear. I couldn't form words to respond. My lungs refused to work. I was drowning in the middle of a coffee shop. A large, warm hand suddenly landed on my shoulder. The touch was so unexpected, so solid, that it broke through the fog of panic. I flinched, my head snapping up. It was Leo. He was out from behind the counter, his face a mask of worry. His other hand gently took the phone from my grasp. "I'm sorry, this is her friend," he said into the phone, his voice impossibly calm. "He's not able to talk right now. Can you text him the details?" He ended the call and slid the phone into my pocket. His hand returned to my shoulder, a steady, grounding pressure. "Hey," he said softly. "Julian, look at me. You're okay. Just breathe." He led me away from the center of the cafe, toward a small, quiet table in the corner that was usually piled with boxes. He sat me down in a chair, his hand never leaving my shoulder. The professional boundary between us hadn't just been crossed, it had been obliterated. He wasn't the barista anymore. He was just a man, his presence a sudden, solid shield against the chaos. He knelt in front of me, bringing his face level with mine. His dark eyes were filled with a startling intensity, a deep well of concern that couldn't possibly be part of his job description. "Breathe with me," he commanded gently. And he took a slow, deliberate breath, and I found myself mirroring the action, my starved lungs finally drawing in a ragged gulp of air. And out we did it again. And again. Slowly, the roaring in my ears subsided. The cafe came back into focus. I was hyper-aware of everything about him. The warmth of his hand, a solid point of contact in my spinning world. The scent of him, coffee and soap and that faint, warm spice, was stronger now, more immediate. It was strangely comforting. He was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his dark brown eyes. I could feel the low vibration of his voice not just in my ears, but in my chest. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't pry or offer platitudes. He just stayed there, a quiet, unwavering presence, until my shaking subsided. He disappeared for a moment and came back with a glass of water and my coffee, which he had remade. He pushed the water into my hands. "Drink," he said. I obeyed, the cool liquid a shock to my system. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I stared at the perfect fern he'd somehow managed to pour into the tiny bit of oat milk in my new drink. A masterpiece for a crisis. It felt absurd. Finally, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. The address of the hospital. She was stable, but they were taking her in for observation. My hands were still trembling too much to type a reply. "I get it," Leo said suddenly, his voice a soft rumble. It made me look up from the screen. That phone call. The world just stops. My dad had a heart attack a few years back. I was at work, just like this. Got the call and felt the floor disappear. That small confession, that glimpse of his own vulnerability, did more to calm me than anything else had. He wasn't some unflappable pillar of strength. He was a person who understood what it was to have the ground crumble beneath your feet. He saw my messy, panicked, unraveling self, and instead of backing away, he had stepped forward and shared a piece of his own brokenness. It created a strange, immediate intimacy between us, forged in the crucible of my panic. I have to get to the hospital," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's a couple of hours away." "You're in no shape to drive," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He pulled a pen from his pocket and grabbed a napkin from the dispenser on the table. He scribbled something on it and pushed it across to me. It was his name and a phone number. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. I'll drive you." The offer was so astounding, so far beyond the realm of anything I could have expected, that I just stared at him. "You don't have to do that," I protested weakly. "You don't even know me." "I know your name is Julian," he said, a faint echo of our earlier conversation. "And I know your coffee order. And I know you shouldn't be driving right now. Text me your address. I'll pick you up." He stood up, his gaze steady and resolute. There was no room for argument in his eyes. He squeezed my shoulder one last time before turning and walking back behind the counter, leaving me alone at the table with a perfect coffee, a glass of water, and a napkin that felt like it held the weight of the entire world. That night, the world was a blur of rain-streaked asphalt and the rhythmic thump of windshield wipers. Leo's car was old but clean, and it smelled like him, that faint, warm spice mixed with the clean scent of rain. I sat in the passenger seat, a silent, tense bundle of nerves, staring out at the hypnotic dance of headlights on the wet road. The easy intimacy of the cafe had been replaced by the charged quiet of this small, enclosed space. He drove with a quiet confidence, his large hands resting easily on the steering wheel. He had put on some soft, instrumental music, a gentle melody that filled the space without demanding attention. After nearly an hour of silence, he spoke. "You want to talk about it?" he asked, his voice a low counterpoint to the music. "About your mom." And so I did. I told him about her, about my complicated, loving, frustrating relationship with her. I told him about my sister and the weight of being the supposedly stable one. The words just poured out of me, a torrent of fear and memory I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. He didn't offer advice or easy comforts. He just listened. He would make a small sound of acknowledgement, a low hum of understanding, or ask a gentle question that showed he was truly hearing me. He was giving me space to unload the contents of my frantic mind, and it felt like I was being unburdened, piece by piece. The hours flew by in a haze of conversation and rain. The hospital was a sterile, brightly lit nightmare. Hours were spent in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. My mom was stable, they said. A broken wrist and a mild concussion. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation. The relief was so profound it left me feeling hollowed out, boneless with exhaustion. It was nearly 2 a.m. Leo had been by my side the entire time, a silent, steady presence in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to me. He had bought us terrible coffee from a vending machine and had made me eat a stale granola bar from his glove compartment. When we finally left, the rain had stopped, but the air was cold and damp. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. All the hotels around here are booked, I mumbled, scrolling uselessly through an app on my phone. There's a convention in town. My own apartment was 2 hours in the opposite direction. The thought of getting back in the car felt impossible. My place is only about 20 minutes from here, Leo said, his voice quiet. It's not much, but I've got a couch. You can crash there. I was too exhausted to argue, too grateful to refuse. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. It was small and sparsely furnished, but it was clean and warm. It felt like him. There were stacks of books on the floor, a well-loved guitar leaning in one corner, and a few framed black and white photographs of mountains on the walls. It was a space that felt lived in and real. You can take the bed, he said, gesturing toward a door. I'll take the couch. Don't worry, I can sleep anywhere. No, I can't, I protested immediately. It's your bed. I'll take the couch. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It's a really uncomfortable couch. Trust me. He disappeared into the bedroom and came back with a pillow and a thick quilt. He looked at me, then at the small, lumpy sofa. A look of indecision crossed his face. The air between us was thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't the panic of the hospital or the awkwardness of the car. It was something else, something fragile and uncertain. The bed's big enough for 2, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He wasn't looking at me, but at the quilt in his hands. If you're okay with that, we can just sleep. I just don't want you on that couch. My heart hammered against my ribs. The question hung in the air, freighted with unspoken meaning. This was the point of no return. A simple, logistical problem had become a deeply personal decision. My mind, my orderly, grid-loving mind, screamed at me to say no, to take the lumpy couch and maintain the safe distance. But my body, my exhausted, frayed, and strangely hopeful body, just wanted to lie down in a warm bed and not be alone. Okay, I heard myself say, the word a small puff of air. His eyes finally met mine, and in them, I saw a flicker of something I couldn't name. Relief? Hope. He gave me a small, hesitant nod and led the way into the bedroom. He gave me a spare t-shirt to sleep in. It smelled of him, that clean, spicy scent, and putting it on felt more intimate than anything I had ever done. We got into the bed from opposite sides, the mattress dipping under our respective weights. We lay on our backs, stiff as boards, a canyon of cool sheets between us. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the room. I could hear him breathing, a slow, steady rhythm in the quiet dark. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was back in the coffee shop, phone pressed to my ear, my sister's frantic voice echoing in a vast, empty space. The floor was falling away, and I was gasping for air, a terrible pressure building in my chest. I woke with a jolt, a choked gasp escaping my lips. The nightmare clung to me like a shroud, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. Hey, the voice came from the darkness beside me, a low, sleep-thick rumble. You're okay. A warm weight settled on my chest. It was his hand, large, solid, and impossibly gentle. His thumb began to rub slow, soothing circles just over my heart. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure, unadulterated sensation that chased away the last vestiges of the nightmare. It wasn't a tentative, accidental brush. It was a deliberate, confident act of comfort. An anchor. Just a bad dream. I whispered into the darkness, my voice shaky. I know, he rumbled. Just breathe. You're safe. He didn't move his hand. He just kept it there, a steady, reassuring pressure. The frantic hammering of my heart began to slow, syncing up with the calm, rhythmic stroke of his thumb. I was intensely aware of his body next to mine, the heat radiating from him across the small distance between us. I could smell the warm, clean scent of his skin. My carefully ordered world had not just been dismantled, it had been set on fire. And in the ruins, something new and terrifying and beautiful was beginning to grow. I closed my eyes, focusing on the feeling of his hand on my chest, the sound of his breathing in the dark, and for the first time all day, I felt completely and utterly safe. I fell asleep like that, anchored to him in the quiet darkness. The morning light was gray and unforgiving. I woke slowly, coming to awareness in layers. First, the unfamiliar weight of the quilt. Second, the faint scent of coffee already brewing. Third, the cold, empty space beside me in the bed. His hand was gone. The warmth was gone. I sat up, the borrowed t-shirt feeling thin and foreign against my skin. The easy intimacy of the night, the profound connection I had felt in the dark, seemed to have evaporated with the dawn. I found him in the kitchen, his back to me as he stood over the stove. He was wearing a fresh shirt, and the sight of it created a sudden, sharp distance between us. He was dressed for the day, for the world outside this apartment. I was still in his bedclothes. The silence was a physical presence in the small room, thick and suffocating. "Morning," he said, without turning around. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth it had held just hours before. "There's coffee." My anxiety, which had been soothed to sleep by his touch, woke up and began to scream. This was it. The cold light of day. He regretted it. All of it. The car ride, the bed, the hand on my chest. It had all been a moment of pity for the pathetic, panicking guy from the coffee shop. I had been a project, a stray animal he had taken in for the night, and now he was politely waiting for me to leave so he could get on with his normal life. I had misread everything. The kindness, the concern, the touch. It was all just him being a good person, and I had layered it with my own desperate, lonely fantasies. I had ruined it. I had taken our simple, perfect customer-barista dynamic and made it weird and uncomfortable. "Thanks," I mumbled, my throat tight. I poured myself a mug of coffee, my movements stiff and awkward. I felt like a stranger, an intruder in his space. I needed to get out. I needed to reset things, to put the walls back up before I did any more damage. I drank the coffee standing up, the hot liquid scalding my tongue. It tasted bitter. "I should go," I said, placing the mug in the sink. "Thank you for everything. Seriously, I don't know what I would have done last night." I couldn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the faucet, on the window, on anything but the man standing just a few feet away. "No problem," he said, his voice still unervingly neutral. He finally turned, but he wouldn't meet my eyes either. He was looking at the counter, at his own mug of coffee. The emotional chasm between us felt 1,000 miles wide. My fears were confirmed. He was distant. He wanted me gone. The confirmation was a cold, hard stone in my gut. I practically fled to the bedroom to change back into my own clothes. They felt like a costume, a return to my proper role. I folded his t-shirt and placed it neatly on the bed. When I emerged, my jacket was on and my keys were in my hand, a clear signal of my imminent departure. I walked to the door, my heart a dull, aching drum in my chest. I just had to get through the next 30 seconds. "Well, thanks again," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "I'll see you at the shop." I tried to make it sound casual, normal, as if the last 12 hours hadn't happened. "Julian," he said my name, and it stopped me cold. "Wait." I turned around slowly, bracing myself for the final blow. The awkward, "let's just forget this happened" speech. The confirmation that I had made a complete fool of myself. He was standing in the middle of the room now, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. He looked nervous as I felt. That wasn't in the script my anxiety had written. "We should probably talk," he said, finally lifting his gaze to meet mine. His eyes were dark and serious, and I saw not regret, but a deep, churning uncertainty. "Okay," I whispered, my hand falling from the doorknob. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "Last night," he started, then stopped. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "The hand on your chest, it wasn't just a reflex. I was awake. I didn't want you to feel alone." My own breath hitched. "And the coffee shop," he continued, the words coming faster now. "Asking for your name. That wasn't an accident. I wanted to ask you for weeks. Months, maybe. I'm an idiot." I didn't know how. He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "I know your coffee order by heart. Not because I'm a good barista, but because it's your order. I noticed you the first week I started working there." The world stopped spinning. The narrative I had so carefully constructed, the one where I was an inconvenience, a pity case, was shattering around me. He had noticed me, not just as a customer, but as me. "I just figured you were straight," he said, his voice dropping again. "We're just coming in for the coffee. I didn't want to be that guy, you know? The creepy barista hitting on a customer. So I just made your coffee. And hoped maybe you'd say something." He looked at me, his expression open and vulnerable, all his confident armor gone. This morning, I was quiet because I was terrified. I thought I'd completely overstepped. I thought the hand on your chest freaked you out, and you couldn't wait to get away from me. The relief that flooded through me was so immense, so powerful, it almost brought me to my knees. It was a physical release, a cord of tension I hadn't even realized I was holding suddenly snapping. He hadn't been distant because he regretted it. He'd been distant because he was scared. He was just as lost in this as I was. No, I said, and my voice was surprisingly strong. God, no. I thought the exact same thing about you. And then it was my turn. The words I had locked away in the impossible folder in my mind came tumbling out. I told him how I'd watched him for months, how his smile was the best part of my day. I told him about my stupid, secret art collection of his latte art photos. I told him I was sure he was just being nice, that it was his job, and that I was just another anonymous customer. I told him that when he touched my chest last night, it was the first time I had felt safe in years. When I finished, the silence in the room was different. It was full, not empty. It was vibrating with all the things we had finally said out loud. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He stopped just in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth of his body, smell that coffee and spice and soap scent that was just him. "Can I?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. His eyes flickered down to my lips. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. The kiss was nothing like I had imagined in my countless daydreams. It was better. It was slow, tentative at first, a question asked and answered. His lips were soft, and he tasted faintly of the coffee we had just shared. He brought a hand up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and I leaned into his touch, my own hands coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel it beating, a strong, steady rhythm beneath my palm. Then the kiss deepened. All the months of unspoken yearning, of secret glances and quiet admiration, pouring into it. It was a kiss of profound relief, of homecoming. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't the destruction of my orderly life. It was the final, perfect alignment of the grid. It was finding the one piece that made the entire design make sense. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet discovery. My daily trips to the coffee shop transformed. They were no longer the solitary peak of my day, but a prelude. The small, private smile he gave me now held a world of shared secrets. Sometimes his fingers would brush against mine as he handed me my drink, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt all the way up my arm. He was still Leo the barista to the rest of the world, but to me, he was just Leo, and I was Julian, and we were the beginning of a story. Our first real date was on a Sunday, his day off. We went to an art museum, and I found myself looking at the paintings less and at him more. I watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he studied a piece, the way the light from the gallery windows caught the gold flecks in his eyes. He told me about the mountain range tattooed on his arm. It was a range from his childhood home, a place he missed. I told him about my passion for typography, and he listened with a genuine interest that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. He came over to my apartment, my sterile, minimalist sanctuary, and he didn't make it feel cluttered. He made it feel warm. He stood in front of my oversized monitor, looking at the branding package I was designing for a new client, and he saw things I hadn't. He pointed out the way a curve in the logo echoed the architecture of the company's building. "You've got a good eye," he said, and the simple praise from him meant more than any client approval. I learned that his steady, grounded presence hid his own insecurities. He worried he wasn't creative, that all he could do was follow a recipe, whether for coffee or for life. I showed him his photographs of mountains, the ones hanging on his apartment wall. "This is creative," I told him. "You see the world in beautiful ways." We cooked dinner together in my small kitchen, bumping into each other, our movements an awkward but happy dance. We learned the small, domestic details of each other. He hated mushrooms. I couldn't cook rice to save my life. He liked his music quiet, and I liked to work in silence. We were 2 different worlds, 2 different designs, learning how to merge our palettes, how to create a new composition together. One Tuesday, about a month after that first, terrible, wonderful day, I went into the coffee shop. There was a new trainee at the register, a nervous-looking teenager with wide eyes. Leo was behind the counter with him, guiding him through the orders. I stepped up to the counter. "What can I get for you?" the trainee asked, his voice cracking slightly. I smiled. A large iced Americano, for shots, light on the ice, with a splash of oat milk and 1 pump of sugar-free vanilla, please. The kid's eyes widened in panic as he tried to punch the modifiers into the screen. 4 shots. Leo stepped in, placing a gentle hand on the trainee's shoulder. He looked right at me, and his smile was a slow, warm sunrise. It was a smile meant only for me. I've got this one, he said to the kid. Then, his voice clear and loud enough for the people in line behind me to hear, he said, it's a large iced Americano. 4 shots, light ice, splash of oat, 1 pump sugar-free vanilla. For Julian. He said my name. Not to me, but for the cup. For the world. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a statement. This is Julian. I know his order. He belongs here. In our own small, quiet way, it was a declaration. The perfect, complicated coffee he handed me a moment later tasted like a promise. My life used to be a fortress, built of right angles and clean lines, designed to keep the messiness of the world at bay. I thought order was safety. I thought routine was strength. But my walls weren't just a defense. They were a prison, keeping me isolated in my own carefully curated solitude. Leo didn't tear those walls down. He didn't storm the gates. He just found the one small, unlocked door, a ridiculously complicated coffee order, and waited patiently for me to realize it was there. He showed me that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but an invitation. The risk of stepping off the grid, of embracing the chaos of another person, was terrifying. But the reward was this. The feeling of his hand in mine as we walked down the street. The sound of his low laughter in my quiet apartment. The taste of a perfect coffee, forever linked to the memory of his hand on my chest, and the sound of my name in his voice. It was the taste of finally, truly, coming home.